The courthouse was alive with quiet tension, the kind that prickled the skin and made hearts beat faster, even in seasoned lawyers. It was a bright morning outside, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy, thick with anticipation. Every seat in the courtroom was taken, except for a few empty rows reserved for reporters who were eagerly shuffling notes and adjusting cameras. The case had already captured national attention, a high-profile child abuse trial involving a young girl named Emily Carter, whose courage or silence had now become the central piece of evidence. Emily sat in the back row, her small frame barely visible over the edge of the wooden bench. She hugged a small stuffed rabbit tightly, its fur worn from years of nightly hugs and whispered secrets. Her blue eyes were wide, absorbing everything around her, yet distant, like she existed both in the room and elsewhere, in a memory she could not fully face. She had not spoken a word since the night she was rescued from the decrepit trailer, and most of the adults in the room assumed she never would. Her foster parents sat beside her, hands intertwined in silent support. They had been warned that the courtroom could be overwhelming for a child, especially one with trauma as deep as Emily's. Her foster mother, a tall woman with auburn hair tied neatly in a bun, brushed a strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "You're safe here, sweetie," she whispered, though Emily's gaze remained fixed on the doors at the front of the courtroom. Suddenly, the doors opened, and in walked something that made Emily stiffen. A German shepherd, its coat glossy, its eyes sharp and intelligent, moving with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. Ranger, the K-9 unit star, padded beside his handler, a tall, stoic man in his 30s named Officer Jameson. Ranger was not just any K-9. He was trained specifically to work with children, to detect fear, danger, and even deception. Most dogs reacted to commands. Ranger reacted to instincts, and the instincts told him something about this small child was extraordinary. The audience and courtroom staff shifted, some murmuring under their breath as the dog's gaze locked on Emily. He moved slowly down the aisle, each pawful precise and silent. It was as though he was aware that this was not just another mission, not just another courtroom appearance. He knew Emily, or at least he sensed her presence in a way no human could understand. The prosecutor, a tall woman with sharp features and an unwavering gaze, rose from her seat. She had been briefed on Emily's silence, her trauma, and Ranger's role in the original rescue mission. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but careful, "we request Ranger's presence to assist Emily in providing testimony. His training is specialized to make traumatized children comfortable and to help us uncover facts they might otherwise be unable to communicate." The defense attorney, a man with graying hair and a reputation for courtroom theatrics, immediately frowned. "Objection," he said, his tone laced with disbelief. "This is highly unusual. A dog cannot testify. It cannot communicate. This is theatrics, plain and simple, and it has no place in this courtroom." The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, tapped her gavel lightly. "I will allow it," she said calmly. "If the child feels more comfortable, the dog may accompany her, but any interpretation of the dog's actions must be corroborated by the handler and official K-9 reports." Ranger stopped in the center of the aisle, sitting on his haunches as he watched Emily intently. A shiver went through her small body and she instinctively reached out her hand. The handler knelt beside her, whispering gently, "It's okay, Emily. He won't hurt you. He's here to help." Emily's fingers trembled as they grazed Ranger's collar. The courtroom fell silent. The murmurs ceased. Even the camera crews seemed to hold their breath. It was as if time itself had paused. Ranger's ears twitched, his eyes unwavering, and for the first time since her rescue, Emily blinked rapidly, her pupils dilating as a mix of fear and recognition flashed across her face. Flashbacks surged, unbidden, unrelenting. The night she had been found hiding in the trailer replayed in fragments, the smell of damp wood and mold, the shadows of towering figures, the whispered threats, the fear that kept her silent for months. She remembered the bright flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, the officers' voices calling her name, and briefly, a blur of fur and movement that had guided her to safety. Ranger had been there, she realized, even if she hadn't fully understood it then. The prosecutor quietly addressed the court. Ranger has previously assisted Emily during her recovery and has shown the ability to respond to her cues. He is trained to detect distress and to help her communicate when she is unable to speak openly. The defense attorney's eyes narrowed. This is highly prejudicial. A dog cannot corroborate testimony. It is neither witness nor authority. I insist this is irrelevant. The judge, unshaken, nodded. The court will allow Ranger's presence. Any actions observed will be documented by the handler. Let us proceed with caution and respect for the child. Emily shifted in her seat, the stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she extended her hand toward Ranger. The dog responded instantly, moving closer and sitting directly in front of her. He tilted his head, ears pricked, as if listening, waiting for a signal only he could understand. The audience felt the tension, electric and suffocating. Even seasoned reporters exchanged glances, cameras trained on the small girl who might not speak a word, and the dog whose instincts could reveal more than testimony alone. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath held in collective suspense. The handler, Officer Jameson, whispered softly, "You can talk if you want, Emily. Ranger is here. He's your friend." Emily's lips parted slightly, a soundless whisper forming in her throat, but no words came. Ranger shifted slightly, nudging her hand gently with his nose. The smallest contact, yet it carried the weight of reassurance. Emily's small hand rested on the dog's collar, and her eyes shone with a glimmer of trust, something long buried under fear. The judge and attorneys watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity. They had never witnessed anything like this in court. The bond between Emily and Ranger was palpable, almost tangible, a silent communication bridging years of trauma and months of silence. The courtroom had become more than a place of legal proceedings. It had transformed into a stage for courage, instinct, and unspoken truths. Even the defense attorney, known for his unwavering skepticism, shifted uneasily in his chair. He tried to maintain composure, but the undeniable tension in the room made his usual bravado falter. Every eye, every ear, every camera lens focused on the small girl and the dog, anticipating the first moment she might speak. Emily's foster mother whispered almost to herself, "It's okay, baby, you're safe now." Emily's blue eyes flicked toward her mother, then back to Ranger. The dog's steady presence seemed to ground her. She pressed her small hand harder against his fur, and for the first time since the rescue, a subtle change occurred. The trembling subsided, replaced by a quiet determination, a hint that something long suppressed was ready to surface. The court reporter paused mid-note, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ranger remained seated, alert but calm, eyes fixed on Emily as if he were guarding more than just a child. He was guarding a truth that had been buried, waiting for the right moment to emerge. For a fleeting moment, the audience and courtroom officials shared a collective understanding. This was not just a procedural hearing. This was the threshold of revelation. Something profound was about to occur, and everyone knew it. The anticipation was electric, suspense laced with fear and hope alike. Emily's fingers curled slightly, brushing Ranger's fur. A soft exhale escaped her lips. She shifted forward, her gaze unwavering. The stuffed rabbit in her lap fell forgotten to the floor. Her hand remained on Ranger, steady now, and the audience could see the unspoken communication passing between them. Ranger's ears twitched, his eyes sharp, and the handler whispered, "He understands. He's ready when you are." The courtroom waited. Every heartbeat in the room synchronized to a rhythm of suspense. Emily, the small, silent girl, and Ranger, the calm yet vigilant K9, were poised on the brink of something monumental. The air seemed to pulse with possibility, and even the judge leaned forward, sensing that history was quietly unfolding before her eyes. And in that charged silence, Emily's small hand tightened on Ranger's collar, her breathing steadying, a flicker of courage igniting in her eyes. Something deep inside her stirred, a voice long silent preparing to emerge. Every adult in the courtroom, every observer, sensed the unthinkable, the moment when a child's silence could speak louder than words, aided by a dog whose instincts transcended human understanding. The courtroom, filled with tension, anticipation, and hushed whispers, held its collective breath. Time seemed suspended. Everyone knew that what happened next could change everything, not just for Emily, but for the trial, for the missing pieces of a harrowing night, and for the lives tethered to this moment. Emily looked up at Ranger. His eyes met hers with unwavering focus. The handler nodded subtly, and in the quiet, powerful way that only profound silence can prepare, Emily took the first step towards speaking. The courtroom still buzzed faintly from the tension of Ranger's arrival. Reporters whispered behind cameras, attorneys adjusted notes nervously, and the judge tapped her gavel as if reminding everyone to remain composed. Yet all attention remained on Emily Carter and the German shepherd sitting in front of her, a living bridge between her silence and the world around her. Every person in the room could sense the electric, almost mystical, connection forming between the child and the K9. Emily's small fingers lingered on Ranger's fur. She had never experienced a touch that felt so safe, so grounding. Each brush of the dog's coat against her hand sent tremors through her chest, but not the kind born of fear. This was different. It was reassurance, a quiet yet powerful signal that she was no longer alone in facing the shadows of her past. Ranger's presence anchored her, and for the first time in months, she felt capable of observing, of being aware, without paralyzing fear. The prosecutor, noticing the shift in Emily's demeanor, leaned slightly forward in her chair. Her voice, calm but insistent, filled the courtroom. "Your Honor, we intend to begin Emily's testimony using Ranger to facilitate communication. We recognize that her trauma makes verbal expression difficult, but Ranger's instincts and trained behavior can help us understand what she experienced." The defense attorney, his face pale with disbelief, sprang to his feet. "Objection! This is outrageous. A dog cannot be a tool for testimony. This is theatrics, pure and simple. A 6-year-old child cannot be guided by a dog into truth without it being considered coaching. I demand this be dismissed." The judge, however, raised a hand in gentle authority. "The objection is noted, but I will allow the procedure. Officer Jameson will document Ranger's behavior. Any interpretation will remain under the prosecutor's guidance, and the defense may cross-examine all observations. We proceed with caution." Ranger's ears twitched, sensing the tension in the room. His eyes, sharp and focused, never left Emily. He was alert, not aggressive, but entirely aware of the atmosphere, aware of the humans, aware of the fear lingering in the girl's body. He moved closer, resting his muzzle lightly on the edge of her chair, allowing her to feel his warmth and steadying presence. Emily's foster mother whispered, almost reverently, "It's okay, baby. He's here with you. He won't let anything hurt you." Emily blinked rapidly, but she did not remove her hand from Ranger's collar. She tilted her head slightly and exhaled slowly, a motion so subtle that many in the courtroom might have missed it if not for the intensity of their focus. Suddenly, flashbacks invaded her mind. The decrepit trailer, shadows moving across the walls, whispers and threats that had kept her silent for months, the smell of mildew and decay, and then the blurred memory of fur, moving swiftly to guide her to safety. Ranger had been there, even if she hadn't known it then. Her hand pressed against his fur, and it was as though the memory connected her to him across time, pulling fragments of courage from a place deep within her. The audience, sensing the extraordinary bond, leaned forward. Camera lenses focused on the girl, capturing the moment her hands no longer trembled but rested with intention. The courtroom reporter paused mid-note, pen hovering over the page. This was no ordinary testimony. This was a silent dialogue between a child and a K9, a language that transcended words. Officer Jameson knelt beside Emily, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ranger is ready, Emily. You can tell him what you want. He'll listen. He understands you." Ranger's tail twitched subtly. He nudged Emily's hand with his nose, a gentle prompt that conveyed reassurance, encouragement, and permission. Emily closed her eyes briefly, drawing in a shaky breath. When she opened them, they were brighter, sharper, filled with an unspoken determination. She pressed her hand firmly on Ranger's collar and leaned slightly forward, as if the courage she needed was flowing through the dog's body into her own. The courtroom felt the shift, a collective intake of breath from every observer, the tension growing heavier, more tangible. The defense attorney muttered under his breath, incredulous at the spectacle, but even he could not deny the change in Emily. She was no longer frozen, no longer hiding from the world. Something fundamental had shifted, and Ranger's presence was the catalyst. The prosecutor spoke softly, directing Emily gently. "If you want, you can show Ranger where things happened. He can help us understand." Emily's lips barely moved. She did not speak aloud, but she pointed to the front of the courtroom, then to the space beside her. Ranger followed her gestures with precise attention, his eyes flicking to each subtle movement. The handler carefully noted the cues. A soft murmur ran through the courtroom. Even the judge's stoic expression revealed a flicker of astonishment. No one had ever witnessed a child communicate so clearly through a trained K-9, and yet there was no doubt about the authenticity of the interaction. It was as if Emily and Ranger shared an unspoken code, one built on trust, instinct, and the scars of a shared past. Emily's thoughts drifted back to the night of her rescue. The darkness of the trailer had been suffocating, her small body pressed into the corner, trembling. Ranger had appeared in her memory as a shadow of courage, guiding her to safety. She had trusted him then, instinctively, without words, and now she could trust him again. Ranger's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering and intelligent. He tilted his head slightly, ears forward, as if encouraging her to continue. Emily's small fingers gripped his collar, knuckles white, but there was strength in the pressure. The courtroom was silent, the air taut with anticipation. Every eye was drawn to the girl and the dog, and even the murmurs of the reporters had faded into a collective stillness. The foster parents held their breaths. The mother whispered encouragement again, brushing a hand across Emily's back. Emily flinched at first, then relaxed slightly, letting the contact soothe her. She realized she was no longer alone. The fear that had kept her silent for months began to ebb, replaced by a fragile, growing confidence. The prosecutor leaned forward, sensing the perfect moment. "Emily, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. Ranger is here with you. You can show him what happened." Ranger gave a single, soft bark, barely audible, as if to affirm the prosecutor's words. The handler nodded slightly, acknowledging the dog's response. Emily's heart pounded. She inhaled deeply, the memory of fear pressing against her chest. But Ranger's calm presence countered it, grounding her, reminding her of safety. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her small hand and touched Ranger's muzzle, a gentle motion of trust. The dog leaned into her touch, allowing her to feel that she was protected. The courtroom waited in almost unbearable silence. The stage was set for something extraordinary. Emily's silence was about to be pierced not by words, but by an action, a connection that only she and Ranger could understand. Every person in the room felt the tension, a mix of hope, dread, and awe. Finally, Emily exhaled slowly, a sound that seemed louder than it actually was. Her eyes met Ranger, and in that gaze an unspoken message passed between them. The small child, silent for months, was preparing to communicate, to convey the truth that words alone could not capture. Ranger's ears twitched, tail still, body poised like a sentinel. He understood the gravity of the moment, as did everyone watching. The judge leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. Even she could sense that this moment would be remembered. The bond between Emily and Ranger was not just remarkable, it was transformative. It was the kind of connection that could alter the course of a case, the trajectory of lives, and perhaps even the destiny of a small, traumatized child finally finding her voice through trust. And in that stillness, Emily pressed her hand more firmly on Ranger's collar. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she was ready. The first chapter of Revelation was about to begin. The courtroom remained hushed, as if every person present sensed that Emily Carter and Ranger, the K-9, were operating on a level beyond words. Emily's hand rested firmly on the dog's collar, and her wide blue eyes scanned the room, absorbing details while remaining locked in a silent dialogue with Ranger. The small child, once frozen by fear, was beginning to respond to a presence she instinctively trusted. It was the first visible sign that she might begin to reveal the truth of that harrowing night. The prosecutor, noting the subtle shift in Emily's demeanor, spoke quietly. "Your Honor, Emily may not speak directly yet, but her gestures and interaction with Ranger may help reveal crucial details about the events that night. His behavior will guide us in understanding her experiences." The defense attorney, still in disbelief, scribbled furiously in his notebook, muttering to himself, "This is absurd. A child pointing to a dog and expecting it to communicate facts. Preposterous." But even he could not ignore the intensity in Ranger's eyes, the dog's unwavering focus on Emily and the subtle cues that were unmistakably deliberate. Emily's memory, long buried under layers of fear and trauma, began to surface. The decrepit trailer where she had been held flashed in her mind, the rotting walls, the faint smell of mold, the shadows that moved menacingly across the room. She remembered the nights when her abuser had whispered threats, insisting she stay silent. Every sound had been terrifying, every movement suspicious, every step toward the door impossible. And then, amidst the darkness, she recalled a blur of fur moving swiftly toward her. A warmth, a guide, a protector she hadn't fully comprehended at the time. Ranger, or the memory of him, had been there, guiding her through the shadows, through the fear, toward safety. Her small hand on his collar now was a bridge to that moment, a connection between the girl and the dog who had silently protected her. The courtroom watched, spellbound, as Emily raised her hand slightly, pointing toward the front of the room. Ranger followed her gesture with acute precision, tilting his head as if confirming understanding. The handler, Officer Jameson, made careful notes, documenting every subtle movement. Each twitch of Ranger's ears, each gentle nudge of his nose against Emily's hand, became evidence in its own right. Emily's foster mother clutched her seat, eyes wet. "It's okay, baby, just let him help," she whispered. Emily's lips parted slightly, and though no words emerged, the tremor in her small body faded. Ranger leaned closer, offering the reassurance she needed. The dog had become her anchor, her courage in motion. The prosecutor continued softly. "Emily, you can guide Ranger to the areas that matter. You don't have to speak. He understands." Ranger's tail swished subtly, a sign that he was attuned to Emily's intent. He remained calm, yet every movement carried precision, as though he was translating the child's silent testimony into actionable observation. Emily's mind returned to fragments of that night. Hiding under a broken table, the floor cold beneath her knees, the constant threat of her abuser's voice, sharp and menacing, the faint glimmers of light from the flashlight beams piercing the trailer's darkness. She remembered the fear so vividly, the sensation of being utterly powerless, and then, fleetingly, the comforting presence of a shadow of fur and warmth guiding her. She shifted slightly, directing Ranger's attention toward the corner of the courtroom nearest to her. The dog responded instantly, moving in a precise arc that mirrored the movements he had made that night. The audience could not see the memory unfolding in Emily's mind, but Ranger's actions made it visible, tangible, undeniable. Every eye in the room followed him, sensing the gravity of what was being communicated without a single spoken word. Even the judge leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes narrowing slightly. She had presided over countless cases, but never had she witnessed this. A child using a K-9 to reveal traumatic events, her gestures and trust guiding the dog to reveal details that might otherwise have been lost. The courtroom felt charged, alive with anticipation. The defense attorney tried to intervene. "Your Honor, this is..." But the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Proceed," she commanded. "Document all actions carefully. Observe the child. The dog's role is permitted for facilitation only." Emily's small fingers pressed more firmly against Ranger's collar, and her gaze sharpened. She indicated the space beneath the witness stand, where the abuser had forced her to sit. Ranger approached deliberately, sniffing lightly, then sat. A subtle nudge with his nose seemed to acknowledge the memory of fear and confinement. The courtroom gasped, recognizing that the dog's behavior aligned with Emily's recollection of events she could not yet articulate. Her memory continued to surface in fragments: a door slamming, a shadow passing the cracked window, the whispered threats that kept her silent for months. She pointed to another area, and Ranger's precise movement traced a path through the room that mirrored her recollection. Every observer felt a chill, the visceral weight of trauma made visible by a dog's instinctual guidance. The prosecutor, careful to maintain composure, narrated the unfolding scene. Ranger is responding to Emily's cues, indicating spaces that match her memory of the trailer and the events of that night. "This is extraordinary, Your Honor, but consistent with his training and Emily's demonstrated ability to guide him." Emily's foster mother whispered again, a shaky breath escaping. "You're safe now. You're doing so well." Emily's eyes met hers briefly, gratitude and fear intermingling. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. For the first time since her rescue, she felt a measure of control over the narrative of her own life. Ranger's attention never wavered. Every subtle gesture, every tilt of his head, every gentle nudge of Emily's hand conveyed understanding and reassurance. The handler recorded each action meticulously, aware that this silent testimony could prove pivotal. Cameras captured every movement. The courtroom held in rapt attention, unable to look away from the unfolding miracle of communication without words. The defense attorney scribbled notes furiously, growing more anxious. "This is preposterous," he muttered under his breath, but even he could not dismiss the undeniable precision of Ranger's responses. The dog's movements were deliberate, specific, and unmistakably tied to Emily's gestures. This was no random behavior. It was evidence in motion. Emily's memory sharpened further. She remembered the fear, the suffocating darkness, the whispered threats, and then the guiding presence of a blur of fur that had led her to safety. The recollection was vivid, haunting, and deeply grounding. Her hand rested firmly on Ranger's collar, and the dog leaned gently into her touch, as if transmitting courage and reassurance across an invisible line connecting them both. The courtroom held its collective breath. Every observer sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding, a revelation that transcended conventional testimony. Emily's silent communication, facilitated by Ranger, was bridging trauma and truth, transforming fear into a method of revealing events that might otherwise have remained hidden. The judge's hands tapped lightly on the bench. "Continue," she said softly, acknowledging the unique nature of the testimony. The prosecutor nodded and allowed Emily to guide the interaction further. Emily directed Ranger toward the side of the courtroom where her abuser had stood. Ranger's nose twitched as he sniffed lightly, then he gave a single, precise bark. It was a small action, yet loaded with meaning. Emily exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and anxiety coursing through her body. She was finally communicating, not with words but with trust, instinct, and courage. Every eye in the courtroom, from the jury to the reporters, recognized the significance. A child who had been silenced by trauma for months was now revealing her experience in a profound, almost miraculous way. Ranger's guidance was bridging the gap between memory and action, fear and revelation. Emily's foster mother clutched her arm, tears running freely. "You're doing it, baby. You're safe," she whispered, though the courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath in unison. Emily's fingers tightened on Ranger's collar, a tangible signal of control, strength, and growing courage. The prosecutor leaned slightly forward, her voice gentle. "Ranger understands your cues, Emily. You can show him what happened. You are safe." Ranger nudged her hand with his nose once more, and Emily exhaled slowly, nodding. The first real bridge between her silence and the truth of that night had been established. The courtroom felt the weight of the moment, emotion, suspense, and relief all mingling in a single, extraordinary tension. For Emily, the memory of that night was no longer a solitary burden. With Ranger by her side, she could face it, guide the narrative, and perhaps finally find the voice she had been denied. The small child and the dog had begun a dialogue that transcended words, one that would ultimately reshape the course of the case and reveal truths that had long been buried in darkness. The courtroom seemed suspended in time, each heartbeat loud against the heavy silence that had settled like a tangible presence. Every eye was fixed on Emily Carter, the small girl whose silence had become legend, and Ranger, the German Shepherd K9, whose instincts had already begun to reveal the hidden horrors of that night. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were waiting for what was about to happen. Cameras were focused, pens poised, and the judge leaned forward slightly, sensing that a pivotal moment in the case was imminent. Emily's hand rested firmly on Ranger's collar, fingers curling into the soft fur. Her knuckles were white, yet there was no hesitation in her grip, only a fragile determination. The stuffed rabbit she had brought for comfort lay forgotten in her lap, its small eyes staring blankly at the floor. Ranger, fully alert, remained seated in front of her, ears forward, tail still, and eyes unwaveringly locked on her face. His body vibrated with awareness, ready to respond to a cue only he could interpret. The prosecutor leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but imbued with encouragement. "Emily, you don't have to speak if you're not ready. Ranger is here. You can show him what you need to. He understands you." Her words were gentle yet firm, acknowledging the weight of trauma that had silenced the child for so long. Ranger tilted his head slightly, as if affirming her statement, nudging Emily's hand with his nose in a subtle gesture of reassurance. Emily closed her eyes briefly, inhaling a shaky breath, feeling the pressure of months of fear and silence pressing against her chest. She recalled the dark corners of the trailer, the whispering threats, and the overwhelming sense of isolation. She thought of the shadowy figure that had dominated her young life, and the helplessness that had left her unable to speak. And then she felt the warmth of Ranger beside her, steady and unwavering, a living anchor that made her realize she could do something she never thought possible: communicate. Her lips parted almost imperceptibly. The courtroom, though tense and watchful, did not yet hear a sound, but the subtle movement signaled the beginning of something monumental. Emily's eyes met Ranger, and in that glance, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The dog's body shifted slightly, alert, his gaze sharp and focused, acknowledging that the moment had arrived. The connection between child and K9 had bridged the chasm of trauma and silence. The judge, sensing the gravity, remained still, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Even the defense attorney, skeptical and resistant, leaned slightly forward, unable to ignore the intensity. He muttered under his breath, frustration evident, yet his gaze remained riveted on the pair. Every person in the courtroom seemed to hold their breath collectively, sensing that Emily's actions, guided by Ranger, would finally speak louder than words. Emily's mind flashed back to the night of her rescue. The shadows of the trailer walls had seemed to stretch endlessly, the darkness oppressive. She had felt trapped, helpless, forced into silence by fear. But even in that darkness, she remembered a blur of fur moving toward her, guiding her to safety. She had trusted instinctively, without words, and now that same instinct was ready to guide her once more. Slowly she leaned forward, fingers tightening on Ranger's collar. Her lips barely moved, and yet the world seemed to hush, as if the courtroom itself recognized the significance of the moment. She whispered, soft but deliberate, her voice trembling yet unmistakable. "Find him." The two words hung in the air like a lightning bolt. The courtroom collectively exhaled, the tension cracking and reverberating through every corner of the room. Gasps erupted from reporters, spectators, and even seasoned attorneys. The defense attorney froze mid-sentence, mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with shock. Ranger's ears pricked, his tail stiffened, and his body shifted into an alert, defensive stance. The dog's response was instantaneous. Ranger moved slightly forward, positioning himself directly between Emily and the front of the courtroom, a protective shield. His eyes locked on the defendant, whose confident posture faltered the moment the dog's gaze fixed upon him. Every subtle muscle movement, every twitch, conveyed an undeniable sense of awareness and intent. Ranger was no longer just a tool or companion. He was an active participant in the revelation of truth. The prosecutor's voice cut through the shocked murmurs. "Your Honor, Ranger's behavior confirms recognition and alert to potential danger. Emily's communication is consistent with her recollection of the events of that night. The child's testimony, facilitated by the K-9, has provided a critical lead." The judge nodded slightly, her gavel poised but still unmoved. She could feel the weight of the courtroom's attention, the almost surreal combination of trauma, instinct, and truth converging before her eyes. This was more than testimony. It was a living, breathing confirmation of events that had remained hidden, perhaps even unspoken, until this precise moment. Emily's foster mother clutched her hands together, eyes wide and shining with tears. She whispered, "You did it, baby. You spoke. You're safe now." Emily's gaze flicked briefly toward her mother, then back to Ranger. The dog's calm, steady presence reminded her that she was not alone, that her words, small though they were, had impact and power. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of disbelief and awe. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Cameras zoomed in to capture the interaction, and even the defense attorney could not mask the shock in his expression. Ranger's alertness, combined with Emily's precise whisper, created a moment that transcended ordinary understanding. The dog's behavior had confirmed the significance of her words, revealing that they were not random or coached but instinctive, precise, and meaningful. Emily's mind returned to the memory of that night, the trailer walls closing in around her, the threats that had silenced her, and the sense of hopelessness that had threatened to consume her. But now, with Ranger responding to her voice and presence, she felt a surge of empowerment. She had spoken. 2 words, small in number but monumental in consequence. The defendant, once smug and confident, now sat rigid, sweat forming on his brow. His eyes darted nervously to Ranger, and the realization that his control over the narrative had been shattered became evident in the slight tremor of his hands. The K-9's instincts had bypassed human skepticism, detecting the threat Emily could not have expressed with words alone. The prosecutor leaned forward again. Ranger is trained to respond to cues from traumatized children. His alertness is a direct response to Emily's command. The court should recognize the significance. The child has indicated a specific threat, and the K-9's behavior validates her testimony. Emily exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering fear coursing through her. She had crossed an invisible boundary, transforming silence into action, fear into courage. Ranger nudged her hand gently with his nose, reinforcing the bond of trust that had guided her to this point. The courtroom remained electric, buzzing with anticipation and awe. Everyone present recognized the gravity of the 2 words, "Find him." They were a turning point, a spark that would ignite a chain of events revealing hidden truths, endangering the guilty, and ultimately saving lives. Even the judge, seasoned and unflinching, allowed herself a brief moment of awe. She understood that this was no ordinary testimony, no ordinary case. The child's courage, the K-9's instincts, and the alignment of the 2 had created an extraordinary revelation, one that would reverberate through the courtroom and beyond. Ranger's gaze remained locked on the defendant, his body tense but controlled, ready to act if necessary. Emily, now emboldened by the response, allowed herself a slight smile, a fleeting acknowledgement that her 2 words had carried weight far beyond her expectations. The courtroom gasped, the tension coiling tighter, ready to snap as the next chapter of this harrowing story unfolded. The defense attorney, attempting to regain composure, leaned toward his client. "This is absurd," he whispered, voice trembling. "A dog cannot interpret a child's trauma. It's circumstantial at best." Yet even he could not deny the unspoken truth. Ranger's behavior had changed the course of the courtroom, signaling a connection, a recognition, and an instinctive warning that could not be ignored. Emily's foster mother squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did it, baby," she whispered again. Emily's blue eyes met her mother, shining with a mixture of relief, courage, and determination. For the first time since her rescue, she felt empowered, understood, and connected, not just to Ranger, but to the world that had seemed so distant and threatening. The prosecutor took a deep breath. "Your Honor, Ranger's alertness and Emily's words have provided a direct lead. The child's testimony, though unconventional, is credible and significant. Immediate action is warranted." The judge nodded slightly, recognizing the unprecedented moment. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward, waiting, collectively holding its breath, aware that Emily's two words had unleashed a chain of events with consequences that none of them could yet fully comprehend. And in that charged, electric silence, Emily pressed her hand more firmly on Ranger's collar. The dog's body vibrated with readiness. The two of them, child and K9, had bridged fear, silence, and instinct to reveal a truth that was undeniable, unshakable, and utterly shocking. The courtroom would never forget this moment. The day a 6-year-old girl spoke just 2 words, and the whole room gasped in shock. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of chaos and stunned silence. Some spectators gasped audibly, others whispered frantically, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Emily Carter, the 6-year-old girl who had been silent for months, had spoken her first words in the courtroom, 2 simple words: "Find him." But those 2 words carried a power that no one had anticipated. Every head turned toward the K9 Ranger, whose posture had shifted from calm attentiveness to a taut, alert energy signaling recognition of an imminent threat. Deputies rose from their seats, moving quickly to secure the doors, ensuring that the room was controlled. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled to capture every angle, and the spectators, a mix of journalists, advocates, and local citizens, leaned forward as though drawn into the tension like magnets. The atmosphere was electric, a strange combination of fear, awe, and disbelief. Even the judge, usually composed and detached, allowed a slight frown to crease her forehead. Something extraordinary was unfolding. Emily's small fingers clutched Ranger's collar, trembling slightly, but there was a new strength in her grip. Her eyes, wide and shining with the intensity of a survivor, met Ranger's gaze. The dog's response was immediate. He positioned himself slightly in front of her, body rigid, tail tense, ears forward, eyes scanning the courtroom as if the memory Emily carried had merged with his instinct. The K9 was more than a dog. He was a sentinel, a protector, and an interpreter of trauma and danger. The defense attorney rose abruptly, his voice shaky but loud. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. This dog is not evidence. This child cannot simply command a K9 and call it testimony. This is manipulative and biased." He gestured wildly toward the K9 and Emily, clearly flustered. His voice trembled, betraying the panic he felt. But even as he shouted, the undeniable truth of Ranger's behavior made it nearly impossible to dismiss. The prosecutor, calm but firm, countered immediately. "Your Honor, Ranger's behavior is a direct response to Emily's cues. He is trained to detect distress, danger, and recognize individuals involved in traumatic events. His reaction is not theatrics. It is scientifically grounded. Emily's words have provided actionable insight, and the K9's response corroborates her testimony in a way that traditional verbal testimony cannot achieve." The judge, tapping her gavel lightly, called for order. "I understand the objection," she said evenly, "but the court recognizes the unique circumstances. The child's safety, trauma, and ability to communicate through Ranger are critical. Proceed with caution. Document all observations carefully." Her eyes flicked to Emily, who sat with a combination of fear and newfound resolve. The judge's gaze softened slightly, acknowledging the bravery required of the young girl in front of everyone. Ranger's gaze scanned the room with meticulous precision. He paused at the defendant, who sat rigidly in the front row, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The K-9's alertness intensified, signaling recognition and threat. Every subtle movement, every tilt of his head, communicated the gravity of the situation. Emily's 2 words had transformed Ranger from passive presence into an active participant in the courtroom, bridging the gap between a traumatized child and justice. The prosecutor leaned forward. "We request immediate action. Ranger has recognized a threat based on Emily's cues. The defendant's presence and potentially other individuals involved must be assessed immediately." Deputies moved with purpose, securing exits and preparing to isolate the defendant if necessary. The courtroom, though contained, buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone could sense that Emily's single phrase had changed everything. Emily, still holding Ranger's collar, felt the familiar tension in her chest. Her memories, vivid and raw, surfaced again. The decrepit trailer, shadows moving across walls, whispered threats that had silenced her for months. She recalled the moments when Ranger had guided her to safety, his presence providing comfort she had never understood fully at the time. Now in the courtroom, the bond was real, tangible, and empowering. She realized she had an ally who understood her in ways no human could. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to Ranger. The K-9's unwavering gaze seemed to pierce through him, exposing fear and guilt he could not disguise. Even the defense attorney seemed unsettled, muttering under his breath. Ranger's instincts had transcended conventional courtroom skepticism. The dog had interpreted the threat and reacted with an intensity that confirmed Emily's 2 words were no random utterance. The judge allowed a brief pause for deputies to assess the situation. Cameras continued to flash, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Spectators whispered and murmured, aware that this was not merely a trial anymore. This was a demonstration of instinct, courage, and the inexplicable bond between a child and a K-9. Every movement Ranger made, every subtle cue he responded to, carried significance. The prosecutor instructed Emily gently. "Emily, you've done so well. Ranger is with you. If you can guide him further, we can understand more." Emily's small hand pressed on Ranger's collar with renewed confidence. She nodded ever so slightly, signaling him to focus on the defendant and the surrounding area. Ranger immediately responded, nose lowered, tail stiff, body poised, scanning for evidence of danger and identifying areas of interest in accordance with Emily's memory. The courtroom remained tense, every spectator frozen in anticipation. The K-9's behavior was uncanny, precise, and unmistakably meaningful. Ranger moved closer to the defendant, pawing slightly at the floor near his feet. Emily's gaze remained steady on him. It was clear to everyone present that she was directing Ranger, not the other way around. The connection between child and dog was both extraordinary and undeniable. Deputies quickly took note of Ranger's behavior, preparing to act if necessary. The prosecutor requested that the defendant remain seated, while additional law enforcement assessed potential risks. Ranger's alertness and Emily's direction created a palpable tension in the room, one that everyone could feel physically. Even the judge seemed to lean forward in her seat, fully aware that the courtroom dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Emily's memories continued to surface, fragmented but powerful. The trailer, the fear, the shadows, and the guiding presence of Ranger intertwined in her mind. She had experienced helplessness, terror, and isolation, but now she felt control. She had communicated. She had spoken. And through Ranger, her message was being interpreted accurately, compellingly, and with immediate impact. The defense attorney, realizing that traditional objections would be insufficient, attempted to argue technicalities about the admissibility of a K-9 facilitated observation. "Your Honor, a dog cannot constitute evidence. This is unprecedented. The child could be manipulated or coached." But the judge remained firm. "Document all observations and continue the proceedings. The child's interaction with the K-9 is central to understanding the events in question." Ranger's focus remained absolute. He sniffed near the defendant's seat, paused, and nudged Emily's hand gently with his nose. The handler, Officer Jameson, recorded the behavior meticulously, noting that Ranger's actions aligned perfectly with Emily's memory and gestures. The audience, reporters, and courtroom officials watched in stunned silence. The air was thick with suspense, anticipation, and a sense that justice was unfolding in a way few had ever witnessed. Emily's foster mother whispered again, a shaky but proud reassurance. "You're doing so well, baby. You're safe now." Emily's fingers tightened slightly on Ranger's collar, and a subtle exhale indicated her growing confidence. She realized she had power, a voice, silent, yet potent. Through Ranger, she had communicated in a way that words alone could not have accomplished. The prosecutor addressed the court again. "Your Honor," Ranger's response indicates recognition and identification. Emily's two words, "find him," were precise, actionable, and corroborated by the dog's behavior. Immediate action is warranted to ensure the safety of potential victims and to confirm the defendant's involvement in further crimes. Ranger's body remained tense but controlled, a physical manifestation of alertness and instinct. Emily's guidance had activated him, and the room could feel the palpable energy. Deputies prepared to follow Ranger's lead, knowing that his instincts, coupled with Emily's memory, could lead to critical breakthroughs. The defendant, now pale and visibly anxious, avoided Ranger's gaze. Every subtle movement the dog made seemed to underscore his guilt. The audience watched in silent shock, aware that the courtroom had transformed from a typical trial into a dynamic, high-stakes interaction between human trauma and animal instinct. Emily's mind drifted briefly to the memory of another child, the boy who had been missing for weeks, last seen near the trailer. Ranger had been trained to track scents, to respond to cues from traumatized children, and Emily's two words had activated that precise skill. She had no way of knowing yet if the missing boy would be found, but her heart raced at the thought of providing him a chance at rescue. The courtroom's atmosphere was electric, the tension tangible. Reporters and spectators leaned forward, cameras capturing every interaction, every subtle cue, every twitch of Ranger's ears. The judge, calm but attentive, allowed the proceedings to continue. She knew she was witnessing something extraordinary, the combined instincts of a child and a K-9 shaping the course of justice in real time. Emily's fingers tightened on Ranger's collar again, and the dog leaned slightly into her touch, acknowledging her leadership. She realized she had communicated more than just fear. She had given direction, purpose, and the potential to save a life. The courtroom, aware of this, remained silent, hanging on the cusp of revelation. And so, the first ripples of action began. Deputies coordinated quietly, preparing to follow Ranger's lead once the courtroom proceedings allowed it. Emily, still trembling slightly but filled with newfound courage, sat poised, her connection to Ranger unbroken, her silent command echoing powerfully through the tension-laden room. The two words had set off a chain reaction, one that would reshape the trial, uncover hidden truths, and reveal the full extent of the danger that had loomed in the shadows. The courtroom gasped again, collectively, as the realization settled. Emily's courage, paired with Ranger's instincts, had initiated a sequence of events that could not be ignored. The child and the K-9 had become the epicenter of an unfolding drama, one that would challenge conventions, alter lives, and push the boundaries of what justice could look like in an extraordinary moment of truth. The courtroom was in controlled chaos. Deputies had moved swiftly, positioning themselves around the defendant and securing the exits, while Ranger remained poised in front of Emily, his body taut with alertness. His ears pricked, tail stiff, eyes scanning every corner of the room. The K-9's instincts had been triggered by Emily's two words, "Find him," and now every subtle twitch, palm movement, and head tilt carried profound significance. This was no longer merely a trial. It was a live investigation unfolding in front of dozens of witnesses. Emily's small fingers gripped Ranger's collar with a newfound strength. Fear was still present, a lingering shadow in her chest, but it had been replaced by purpose. She realized she had a voice, silent yet potent, and through Ranger it was being amplified in ways words alone could never achieve. Her memories surged forward, vivid and fragmented. The trailer's rotting floors, the cold metal of the locks, the faint smell of mildew, and the fear that had once paralyzed her. But also the blur of fur, the warmth, the guidance, and the rescue. Those fragments now aligned with Ranger's instinctive movements. Officer Jameson, kneeling beside Ranger, recorded every movement meticulously. He noted the dog's sudden alert near the defendant's seat, the way Ranger's nose twitched, how he pawed at the floor and circled in a pattern that suggested recognition. "This is precise," Jameson whispered to the prosecutor. "He's marking areas that Emily is identifying with her gestures and cues. This could be pivotal." Emily's foster mother, seated a few rows back, clutched her hands together, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pride. "You're doing so well, baby," she whispered. Emily's lips parted slightly in acknowledgement, her gaze never leaving Ranger. The bond between them was unbreakable in this moment. Each subtle movement of the dog was a signal, and each signal was a revelation. The prosecutor stood, addressing the judge carefully. "Your Honor, Ranger is signaling recognition of potential evidence and areas of concern. We request permission to allow him to assist law enforcement in identifying items or locations related to the crime. Emily's cues have been precise, and the dog's behavior aligns perfectly with her memory." The judge, still processing the extraordinary scenario, nodded slowly. "Proceed cautiously, document everything. Ensure the defendant remains contained and maintain a clear record of the K9's behavior." Her voice carried authority, yet there was a subtle undertone of awe. She understood the significance. This was a child's testimony facilitated by a K9, unprecedented and compelling. Ranger's gaze shifted slightly toward the side of the courtroom where a bag had been placed earlier by the defendant. His nose twitched, tail stiffening further. He moved deliberately toward the bag, pawing gently at its base, then nudging Emily's hand with his nose. The audience gasped. Even the defense attorney's pen paused mid-scribble. The dog's behavior was unmistakable, recognition, alert, and guided by Emily's cues. Emily's small hand followed Ranger's gentle nudge. She traced the outline of the bag as if sensing the memories contained within it. She recalled the items hidden there: a flashlight, a set of keys, and a small, worn piece of fabric she recognized from the trailer. Her finger hovered briefly over the bag, and Ranger pressed his nose into her hand, reinforcing the connection. The prosecutor leaned forward, understanding the weight of this interaction. The deputy guarding the bag carefully opened it, revealing its contents. The flashlight was old, its handle scratched, the keys rusted, and the fabric small and tattered, exactly as Emily had remembered. The courtroom collectively held its breath as the items were lifted into view. Every observer could sense that these artifacts were more than physical objects. They were pieces of a puzzle, fragments of memory, and tangible proof that Emily's trauma had a foundation in reality. Emily exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and anxiety coursing through her. Ranger's presence was grounding, his movements precise, his instincts guiding the investigation with uncanny accuracy. She realized that together, they had begun to uncover truths that had remained hidden for months. Every subtle paw movement and nudge of the nose was translating her memories into actionable evidence. The defense attorney attempted to intervene, voice shaking. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The dog cannot constitute evidence, and the child's testimony is entirely unverified. These items could be coincidental." But even he could not mask the unease creeping into his tone. Ranger's behavior, deliberate and precise, left little room for doubt. The alignment between Emily's cues and the evidence was undeniable. The prosecutor responded calmly but firmly. "Your Honor, Ranger's behavior is consistent with his training to respond to traumatized children and to recognize individuals, locations, and objects associated with trauma. Emily's memory and cues have guided him directly to evidence relevant to the case." The judge nodded, gesturing for the proceedings to continue, fully aware that this was extraordinary and unprecedented in her courtroom experience. Emily's memories surged again, vivid and haunting. She recalled the night she had hidden under the table, the trailer's walls closing in, the whispers and threats that had kept her silent. And then the warmth, the blur of fur, the guiding presence that had led her to safety. Each memory aligned with Ranger's instincts, his precise movements confirming her recollections. Ranger's tail swished slightly as he nudged Emily's hand again, signaling that there was more to uncover. Emily followed his guidance, moving her small hand toward the corner where she remembered a crate used by the abuser. Ranger sniffed, then pawed gently at the floor, reinforcing her gesture. Deputies quickly moved to examine the area, uncovering a hidden compartment containing additional evidence. A torn piece of clothing, a small notebook with scribbled threats, and a set of worn ropes. The courtroom gasped. Every item retrieved validated Emily's memories and Ranger's instincts. The defense attorney's face paled, the once confident demeanor replaced by shock and frustration. The judge maintained her composure, yet her eyes reflected a recognition of the extraordinary unfolding before her. Emily's trauma, once silent and isolating, had become a conduit for discovery and justice. Emily's foster mother whispered encouragement again, her voice shaking. "You're amazing, baby. You're helping people see the truth." Emily's fingers tightened on Ranger's collar, and a small, determined nod acknowledged her mother's words. She realized the power of her actions, the significance of her memories, and the role Ranger had played in translating them into something the world could understand. The prosecutor addressed the court again. "Your Honor, the evidence uncovered directly corresponds to Emily's recollections, facilitated by Ranger's trained behavior. This is a significant development, providing clarity and direction in the investigation. The child's trauma has been validated, and actionable leads have emerged." Ranger remained alert, his gaze shifting between Emily and the defendant. Every subtle movement was deliberate, signaling recognition, threat, and identification. Emily's 2 words had triggered this chain reaction, and now the courtroom was witnessing the tangible results: hidden evidence, corroborated memories, and an undeniable path toward justice. Deputies moved swiftly to secure the items and document them for the record. Cameras captured every interaction, every gesture, every movement, preserving a visual record of the extraordinary collaboration between child and K-9. Emily, seated with her hand on Ranger's collar, exuded a quiet confidence that belied her years. She had transformed fear into action, trauma into revelation, and silence into discovery. The defense attorney, realizing the magnitude of what was unfolding, attempted one last protest. "Your Honor, this is entirely unconventional," but the judge cut him off firmly. "Document all proceedings. The child's interaction with the K-9 is crucial to understanding the events in question. Continue with caution." Her voice carried authority, tempered by the recognition that this moment would be remembered long after the trial concluded. Emily's mind drifted again to the trailer, the fear, the isolation, and the moments of rescue. She felt the familiar warmth of Ranger's body beside her, grounding her, reinforcing her courage. Together, they had begun to uncover hidden truths, and she realized that her silence was no longer a limitation. It was a conduit for justice. The courtroom remained tense, every observer aware that this was no ordinary case. Ranger's precise movements, guided by Emily's cues, had uncovered tangible evidence, validated her memories, and provided actionable leads. The air was charged with anticipation, suspense, and awe. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The combined power of trauma, trust, and instinct revealing truths long hidden in the shadows. And so the first breakthrough had been achieved. Hidden evidence, corroborated by Emily's memory and Ranger's instincts, had begun to unfold the full story. The courtroom, still tense with anticipation, recognized that the next steps would be critical: further investigation, validation, and the ultimate pursuit of justice. Emily, small yet resolute, remained the center of this extraordinary process. her courage amplified by the presence of her faithful K9. The courtroom, still tense from the revelation of hidden evidence, had transformed into a hub of focused anticipation. Deputies and law enforcement officers now moved with quiet precision, carefully documenting the items uncovered from the hidden compartment. Ranger remained alert at Emily's side, his body taut with anticipation, ears forward, tail stiff, and eyes scanning every inch of the room. Every subtle movement of the dog carried meaning, translating the child's silent testimony into actionable leads. The air was electric with suspense, the kind that makes every heartbeat sound deafening in the ears of those witnessing it. Emily's fingers rested lightly on Ranger's collar, a calming presence amid the chaos. She recalled the nights of fear in the trailer, the whispered threats, the shadows that had loomed over her young life. But now, with Ranger at her side, she felt a sense of control she had never experienced before. She was no longer helpless. Her memories, combined with Ranger's instincts, were guiding the investigation in real time. Each subtle nudge of the dog's nose, each shift of his body, reinforced her courage and gave her purpose. The prosecutor, aware of the significance of every movement, addressed the judge. "Your Honor, Ranger has consistently identified areas and items linked to the events in question. We request permission to extend the K9 assisted search to other locations in the courtroom, and with law enforcement approval, to areas nearby that may contain further evidence." The judge nodded, her eyes narrowing in thoughtful consideration. "Proceed with caution. Ensure that all movements and discoveries are carefully documented. Emily's cooperation is voluntary, and Ranger's behavior should be recorded meticulously." Her gaze flicked to Emily, who nodded faintly, signaling that she understood and was ready to continue. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, aware that the next steps could reveal even more crucial evidence. Ranger's attention shifted subtly, his nose twitching, tail flicking ever so slightly, as he picked up a faint scent near the defendant's belongings. He pawed at the floor, then nudged Emily's hand with his nose. It was a clear signal. There was more to uncover. Deputies quickly moved to inspect the area, revealing a small, locked box that had been hidden under a seat. The box was old and scuffed, the kind of container that seemed insignificant at first glance but was now imbued with profound importance. Emily's memories surged again, fragmented but precise. The trailer's corner where the abuser had hidden items, the sound of metal clicking as a box was opened, the fear that had paralyzed her. She traced the box with her small hand, guided by the recollection of tactile details she had once feared would vanish from her mind forever. Ranger pressed his nose gently into her palm, reinforcing the connection, as though transmitting confidence and assurance. Deputies carefully removed the box and brought it forward. The locks were fragile but intact. They opened with a few careful twists. Inside lay a collection of items that made the courtroom gasp: photographs, handwritten notes, and a small, rusted key. Each item seemed mundane on its own, but together they painted a chilling picture of manipulation, coercion, and threats that had been hidden for months. The alignment with Emily's memories was undeniable. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His eyes darted nervously toward Ranger, whose unwavering gaze had become a silent judge of guilt. The K9's posture communicated recognition, vigilance, and threat, leaving no room for denial. Even the defense attorney, who had previously attempted to undermine the K9's involvement, could not mask the anxiety creeping across his face. The courtroom was acutely aware that Emily's two words had set in motion a chain reaction that was now dismantling the defendant's control. Emily exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and tension flooding through her small body. She realized that she had done more than point out objects. She had guided a process that uncovered critical evidence. Ranger's presence beside her was a stabilizing force, amplifying her courage and translating her silent cues into tangible, undeniable facts. Together, they were unraveling a story that had remained hidden in the shadows for far too long. The prosecutor leaned toward the judge. "Your Honor, The items retrieved correspond directly with Emily's memories, facilitated by Ranger's trained response. We request that these items be cataloged as evidence and that further areas identified by Ranger's behavior be searched immediately. The judge nodded, signaling deputies to proceed. Continue, but proceed with caution. Ensure all actions are recorded accurately. This is a unique case, and all evidence must be documented meticulously. Ranger's nose twitched as he picked up another scent, leading Emily toward the back of the courtroom near a storage closet. His movements were deliberate and precise, each step calculated, guided by instinct and Emily's silent cues. Deputies moved cautiously, aware that any misstep could jeopardize the integrity of the investigation. The tension was palpable. The entire courtroom seemed to pulse with anticipation as the next breakthrough approached. Emily's mind drifted again to the trailer, to the nights of fear, and to the moments when Ranger's presence had been her only source of comfort. She realized that her small voice, combined with the dog's instinct, was now powerful enough to reveal truths that had been hidden for months. She traced her hand along the closet door, and Ranger nudged it gently with his nose. Deputies carefully opened the door, revealing another hidden stash. A series of personal items, including a small backpack, additional notes, and a worn piece of fabric matching one found earlier. The courtroom collectively gasped. The evidence was mounting, each item corroborating Emily's memories and Ranger's instincts. The defense attorney's face had turned pale, his previous confidence replaced by palpable fear. Even the judge allowed herself a subtle intake of breath, aware that the proceedings were unlike anything she had witnessed in her career. Emily's foster mother whispered encouragement once more. "You're incredible, baby. Look at what you've done." Emily's fingers tightened on Ranger's collar, her small nod signaling acknowledgement. She realized the weight of her actions. Her trauma had been transformed into a tool for justice, guided by the bond she shared with Ranger. The prosecutor addressed the court again. "Your Honor, Ranger's behavior has facilitated the identification of multiple pieces of evidence, each corresponding to Emily's memories. The child's testimony, though unconventional, has proven precise, actionable, and critical to the case." Ranger remained alert, his gaze fixed on the defendant, his body taut and ready. Every subtle movement communicated recognition, vigilance, and readiness to act. Emily's 2 words, "Find him," had ignited a process that was now uncovering a complex web of evidence, leaving the defendant visibly shaken and the courtroom spellbound. Deputies began to document and secure the newly discovered items, ensuring chain of custody procedures were strictly followed. Cameras continued to flash, capturing every nuance of Ranger's movements, Emily's cues, and the courtroom's reaction. The air was charged with anticipation. Everyone present recognized that these discoveries were crucial, and that Emily and Ranger were at the center of a historic moment of justice. Emily's mind returned briefly to the boy who had been missing, the possibility of others in danger, and the responsibility that had suddenly been placed on her small shoulders. But Ranger's steady presence reminded her that she was not alone. Together, they had become a team, capable of translating fear and memory into tangible action. The courtroom's atmosphere remained electric, the tension and suspense mounting with each passing second. Emily's courage, once dormant, had been activated by Ranger's instinct, transforming silence into revelation. Every subtle nudge of the nose, every paw movement, and every guided gesture had uncovered hidden truths that were now in plain sight for all to witness. As deputies prepared to secure the last of the evidence, Ranger's alertness intensified. He sniffed along the floor, nudged Emily's hand, and paused, signaling one final lead. The prosecutor and judge exchanged a glance, understanding that the breakthrough was nearing its climax. Emily followed Ranger's guidance, small hands trembling but determined, realizing that the culmination of this process was within reach. The K-9's movements led them toward a small ventilation panel near the back of the courtroom. Ranger pressed his paw lightly against it, then looked up at Emily as if asking for confirmation. She nodded, recalling the trailer's hidden ventilation shaft where critical items had once been stashed. Deputies carefully removed the panel, revealing a final collection of evidence: personal belongings of the victims, more notes and photographs. The courtroom erupted in quiet awe. Every piece of evidence confirmed Emily's memories and Ranger's instincts. The defendant slumped slightly, the reality of the situation sinking in. Ranger remained alert, protective, and precise, ensuring Emily's safety while validating the extraordinary testimony she had provided through two simple words. Emily exhaled, a mixture of relief, tension, and pride washing over her. She realized that her courage had been amplified by the bond she shared with Ranger. Together, they had uncovered the truth, piece by piece, and transformed fear and trauma into actionable justice. The courtroom, still tense, recognized that this was a historic moment. A child's silent courage, guided by a K-9, had led to a breakthrough that would resonate far beyond these walls. The courtroom was electric, buzzing with tension, awe, and the quiet hum of disbelief. Emily Carter, the 6-year-old girl whose silence had once been unbroken, sat gripping Ranger's collar, her small fingers trembling but determined. The K-9 remained alert, body tense, ears forward, tail stiff, eyes locked on the defendant. Every subtle movement communicated the magnitude of what had occurred, a complete revelation of hidden truths, all catalyzed by two simple words: find him. The defendant sat slumped, pale and visibly defeated, a stark contrast to the composed fearlessness of Emily and the unflinching presence of Ranger. Deputies began cataloging the final pieces of evidence from the ventilation panel. Photos, notes, personal items, and other incriminating objects had been discovered, confirming Emily's memories and Ranger's guided instincts. Each artifact was meticulously documented, photographed, and bagged for the official record. Cameras flashed repeatedly, capturing the unprecedented collaboration between child and K-9. Even seasoned court reporters, hardened by years of courtroom drama, whispered in astonishment. The magnitude of the moment could not be overstated. This was not just a trial, it was a living demonstration of courage, instinct, and truth. The prosecutor rose, voice firm yet reverent. "Your Honor, the child's testimony, facilitated by Ranger's behavior, has provided irrefutable evidence of the defendant's involvement in multiple criminal acts. Every item discovered corresponds directly with Emily's recollection and the K-9's trained response. We request that the court proceed to review charges for aggravated abuse, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice." The judge nodded, her expression calm but thoughtful, aware that she was presiding over a moment that would be remembered for years. "Document all evidence and ensure chain of custody protocols are followed. This is an extraordinary case, and the child's participation and the K-9's assistance have been pivotal." She paused, glancing at Emily. "Young lady, you have shown remarkable courage today. You have spoken, acted, and helped reveal the truth." Emily's eyes flickered to Ranger, then to her foster mother who sat a few rows back, tears glistening in her eyes. She whispered softly, barely audible over the courtroom's murmurs, "We did it, Ranger, we did it." Ranger's tail swished gently, nuzzling her hand, a silent affirmation of their shared victory. It was a simple gesture, yet profoundly meaningful, the bond of trust, courage, and understanding that had carried them through months of fear and silence. The defendant, realizing that all attempts to deny or manipulate the situation had failed, slumped further in his chair. His shoulders drooped, eyes darting nervously toward Ranger. The K-9 remained unwavering, a sentinel of justice, eyes sharp and body tense. Even the defense attorney who had tried to undermine the proceedings could not mask his anxiety. He muttered under his breath, helpless against the overwhelming force of evidence, instinct, and truth. Emily's foster mother whispered encouragement again. "You were amazing, baby. You've helped so many people today." Emily nodded faintly, still holding Ranger's collar, her mind processing what had just occurred. She thought of the boy who had been missing, the months of fear she had endured, and the power she had discovered within herself. For the first time, her trauma had been transformed into strength, action, and hope. The prosecutor addressed the courtroom one final time before the judge. "Your Honor, based on the evidence uncovered and the testimony provided, we request that the court proceed with formal charges and immediate detention of the defendant. The child's recollections, corroborated by Ranger's trained behavior, are irrefutable and compel decisive action." Deputies moved swiftly to detain the defendant, placing him in handcuffs, while Ranger remained alert at Emily's side. The K-9's presence reinforced the reality. The threat had been neutralized, the perpetrator identified, and the courtroom had witnessed a living demonstration of courage and instinct. The audience erupted in quiet applause, a mix of relief, admiration, and respect for the extraordinary young girl and her K-9 partner. Emily's heart raced as she watched Ranger remain vigilant. She realized that her 2 words had catalyzed a process that exposed truth, protected potential victims, and restored a sense of justice that had been absent for far too long. She had spoken, and for the first time in months, she felt empowered rather than helpless. The courtroom had become a stage for her courage, her memory, and her bond with Ranger, a bond that transcended words. The judge leaned forward, her gavel poised but motionless. She took a deep breath, acknowledging the gravity of the moment. This courtroom has witnessed something extraordinary, the courage of a child, guided by a trained K-9, that has resulted in the revelation of critical evidence and the apprehension of a dangerous individual. The court commends Emily Carter for her bravery and Ranger for his invaluable assistance. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail, while the spectators whispered in awe. The story of a silent child and a vigilant K-9 had transformed into a narrative of hope, courage, and justice. Emily's presence had reminded everyone that even the smallest voice could resonate with tremendous power when guided by trust and courage. Emily's foster mother stood, tears streaming down her face. She approached her daughter cautiously, kneeling to meet her gaze. "You did it, baby. You've helped so many people and you've shown incredible bravery." Emily's lips curved into a faint smile, fingers tightening slightly on Ranger's collar. The dog leaned into her touch, a tangible expression of reassurance and pride. The defendant was led away, his face pale and defeated. The K-9's gaze followed him until he exited the courtroom, ensuring no further threat remained. Emily watched quietly, feeling a profound sense of closure. Ranger remained seated beside her, attentive and protective, ready to act if necessary. The courtroom, though gradually returning to normal, remained charged with the memory of what had just transpired. The prosecutor approached Emily, kneeling beside her, and whispered softly, "You did something incredible today. You helped uncover the truth and ensured justice would be served. Thank you, Emily." She placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, offering reassurance and recognition. Emily nodded, a mixture of pride and exhaustion in her eyes. Ranger's paw rested lightly on her lap, completing the circle of trust and courage that had guided the day. The judge called for final order and adjourned the proceedings, acknowledging the unique and unprecedented events that had unfolded. Cameras continued to flash as spectators slowly filed out, each person aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The culmination of courage, memory, and instinct, all working in harmony to reveal the truth and ensure justice. Outside the courtroom, Emily and her foster mother embraced. Ranger sat attentively beside them, ears perked and tail still. Emily felt a sense of peace she had never known, a realization that her voice, though small, could command attention, action, and justice when paired with trust and courage. The months of silence, fear, and trauma had culminated in a moment that would forever define her young life. Law enforcement officers secured the evidence and prepared to follow up on leads revealed by Ranger and Emily. The story was far from over, but the critical breakthrough had occurred. The defendant had been exposed, hidden truths had been uncovered, and justice had taken its first definitive steps. Ranger's role had been pivotal, and Emily had discovered a power within herself that could never be diminished. As the sun set outside the courthouse, Emily stood with Ranger by her side, her foster mother holding her hand. The world felt different now, safer, brighter, and full of possibilities. She had faced fear, embraced courage, and with the guidance of a loyal K9, transformed trauma into justice. Ranger nuzzled her gently and she whispered softly, "We did it, Ranger. We really did it." The courtroom, the city, and even the nation would soon learn of Emily's bravery and Ranger's extraordinary role. The story of a child, her words, and a dog's instincts had become a beacon of hope, demonstrating that courage could take many forms, and sometimes the smallest voice could have the loudest impact. Emily's journey was far from over, but she had discovered her own strength and the truth of her experiences. Ranger remained at her side, a constant reminder that she was never alone. Together, they had rewritten the narrative of fear, replacing it with action, revelation, and justice. The two words that had started it all, "find him," had unleashed a sequence of events that no one in the courtroom would ever forget. And so, the story concluded not with silence but with empowerment, courage, and an undeniable truth. Emily Carter had faced her fears, spoken her truth, and with Ranger ensured that justice would be served. The courtroom gasped once more, not in shock, but in awe of a child and her K9, whose courage and instinct had changed everything.